Who is piloting the UAPs or UFOs constantly seen in our skies? Where are they from? Why are they here? How long have they been here? What is their mission on planet Earth? Do they come in peace, or do they have more sinister motives? Join Mad Mark as he uncovers the answers to these questions and many more of the mysteries that puzzle us all on Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. And now, here's Mad Mark. Today's episode, Religions, created by the Anunnaki and their chosen humans in order to control what the masses believe and to rob you of your true divine power. Hello everyone, and welcome to Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. I'm Mad Mark, and before I begin, just a quick reminder to please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. I would also like to mention that I have created a new Facebook page for the show. I've put a link in the show description, so check that out. Go ahead and follow me over there. I am hoping that this will become a place where we can all gather to discuss each episode and where you can voice your comments and questions. So please go over and check that out. Okay, for the next few episodes, I am going to take a pause from the works of Zecharia Sitchin and instead focus on a few topics that are both directly and indirectly related to the Anunnaki. And today we are going to start things off by taking a deep dive into religions. Created thousands of years ago by the Anunnaki in an attempt to enforce control over their humans. In the beginning, these Anunnaki gods would often be present in their temples. They could be seen and heard from. They actually walked among the inhabitants of their cities and were a part of their everyday lives. But as time passed and the Anunnaki found it necessary to retreat into the shadows, so to speak, they appointed human kings and priests to become the middlemen between themselves and the human populace. And in time, new and larger religions were created as a useful tool to control not just individual cities or countries, but often entire regions or continents. Now, I am no longer a religious man. Once I discovered these truths, that religions are basically nothing more than useful tools to control us, how could I be? How could anyone be once you've learnt the truth? And if you are a religious person and are hearing this information for the very first time, I know exactly what you are feeling, because I was right where you are now almost 40 years ago when I first discovered these truths. Likely, the first thing you are feeling is anger. Nobody likes to be duped. It's similar to discovering that you've been the brunt of a practical joke. And then the questioning begins. But I first heard of these Bible stories from my parents. They would never lie to me, right? And the truth is, no, they wouldn't. And no, they didn't. Because to them, this was the truth that they learned from their parents, who learned it from their parents, who learned it from their parents, and on and on and on for 2,000 years. That is exactly what the Anunnaki were counting on, that once these religions took hold and became the people's reality, it would automatically be accepted and passed down from generation to generation as factual. Through repetition, the lie becomes truth. But you must look at this logically. Why would the creator of the universe want the people on one insignificant little planet to worship it? Once you consider the vastness of the universe, it seems a bit ridiculous, doesn't it? And then, as I have proven on this program time and time again since the very first episode, there are the numerous times that the stories of the Old Testament were rewritten from the original stories in the ancient Sumerian texts that are thousands of years older. On top of that, you have the Old Testament stories that simply make no sense. When reading these passages, one has to remember that they are attempting to make you believe that it is the creator of the universe making these statements. Case in point, there are several verses in the Old Testament, particularly in Deuteronomy and Numbers, that contain commands concerning warfare supposedly voiced by the creator of the universe that instruct the Israelites who are battling the Midianites to utterly destroy everything that breathes and to kill all of the men and take the women and children as plunder. Does this really sound like something that the creator of the universe would say, when he could simply wave his hand over the land and make these enemies disappear? Or, better yet, since the creator of the universe should certainly be omnipotent, couldn't he have just never created these enemies in the first place? No, this is an Anunnaki god speaking to the Israelites, commanding them to do his dirty work because he did not have the power to do it himself. But let's just play along with that for a moment. So, okay, you are the creator of the universe, and you decide that you want the people of Earth to worship you. Then logically, you would create one central religion and make sure that everyone on the planet followed it. That is what the creator of the universe would do. What they would most certainly not do is to go around to the various points throughout the globe and tell a completely different story with completely different characters and completely different laws, principles, and standards, because you would know in advance that this was going to cause problems. That once these various regions of Earth came together and got in contact with each other and saw that their religions were different, that each one would assume that their way was the truth, all the others were lies, and they would be willing to fight and die in defense of their particular God. And that is exactly what has happened. No, an intelligent and all-seeing God would definitely have avoided a scenario like that at all costs. However, beings who came to Earth from another planet, who created us to be their labor force, and then decided that they wanted us to worship them as gods, and thus created each his or her own religions, that is a much more likely scenario for the chaos that religions have become on this planet. It may not have been their original intent when they first demanded worship from us thousands of years ago, but it has turned into a useful tool for them to continue to control us and, even more importantly, to divide us. Because what was it that a terrified Enlil said when he discovered what the humans were building at the Tower of Babel? Behold, the people are one, and look what they have accomplished. Now nothing that they choose to do will be impossible for them. That time around, the Anunnaki chose to confuse our languages. Before that, they made us all look different as a form of branding so that each Anunnaki could tell his humans from those that belonged to the other Anunnaki. And they topped it off with the single most dividing factor ever created, religions. Divide and conquer has always been their plan, to keep us separated and at war with each other. And it is a plan that any general will tell you always works to perfection. So, what if the story of Jesus, for example, one of love, unity, and divine awakening, was hijacked by the very empire that once feared his message? After crucifying a rebel who spoke of inner light, they realized that they couldn't kill his message. So, they did the next best thing. They institutionalized it, wrapped it in dogma, crowned it with control, and used cathedrals not for communion, but for compliance. And then, of course, they needed an image, something to pass off as the face of Christ, since there wasn't one up to that point. Nobody knew what he had really looked like. Since Christianity's base was in Rome and the majority of the Roman Empire was Europe, they needed a European image of Jesus. They knew that being from the Middle East, Jesus had undoubtedly been a dark-skinned man. In fact, in 2001, Forsynic anthropologist Richard Nave created a model of what Jesus probably looked like. However, I am of the opinion that he probably looked more like this. But that image of a dark-skinned Jesus was never going to be accepted by Europeans. So, during the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci was commissioned to create the first accepted image of Christ. And who did they choose for the model for that painting? None other than Caesar Borgia, who was actually one of the sons of a pope and who killed his own brother in his attempt to take power. This guy was an evil, brutal, killing ruler. Here we see what that session probably looked like. And that image still propagates the planet to this very day. So, the image that a lot of people are praying to is not Jesus, it's actually the evil Caesar Borgia. It always makes me chuckle when I hear about somebody claiming to have seen Jesus or that he came to them in a dream, because that wasn't Yeshua, it was Caesar Borgia. So Christ became a weapon used to conquer lands, crush wisdom traditions, and sever our sacred connection to the divine within. Gospels were cherry-picked, mystical teachings erased, the feminine demonized, and the living temple, your body, declared sinful. But now, across the planet, we are remembering that Christ wasn't meant to be worshipped. He was showing us the mirror, a mirror of compassion, sovereignty, healing, and the divine light encoded in every soul. And that, as he said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. And we are going to be revisiting that phrase just a couple shows from now when we take a deep dive into the power that resides inside every one of us, the power that I like to call the secret. But I'll tell you another secret about Jesus. That wasn't his name at all. They changed Yeshua's name to Jesus when creating the Bible. The letter J was not in existence back then. The letter J was not invented until the Italian Renaissance grammarian Gian Giorgio Trissino distinguished the I sound from the J sound around the year 1524. This split eventually led to the consonant sound J and the vowel sound I becoming distinct from one another. This change eventually took hold in the English language in the 17th century, as seen in the 1629 revision of the King James Bible. So until that time, it was actually pronounced Jesus. And what did that mean? It translates to Hail Zeus. What better way to get the Roman worshippers of Jupiter, aka Zeus, aka Enlil, to switch allegiance to this new religion than to rename Yeshua to Jesus? And this is not blasphemy. This is liberation. And the teachings of Jesus were never about one man. It's about all of us. But the spell is breaking. The veil is lifting, and the true gospel, the one written in your heart, is rising again. The Roman Empire hijacked the Jesus movement, and the people seem to have this idea that the church is made up of these innocent, sweet priests just trying to do the Lord's work. In reality, it's the evolution and remnants of the most powerful empire in our recent history. No, Christianity was not spread by peace and love as they would have you believe. At least not for the majority of the regions where it was introduced. After the fall of Rome, the power of conversion often shifted to kings and emperors. Charlemagne, for example, forcibly converted the Saxons in the 8th century. It was a brutal campaign and a blueprint for later religious conflicts. Does the name the Spanish Inquisition mean anything to you? The Christianization of South America was more of the same. Spanish conquistadors used the pretext of spreading Christianity to justify their brutal conquests in search of gold and power. In 1513, the Spanish crown created a legal ultimatum called the Requerimiento. It was given to the indigenous peoples, commanding them to convert to Christianity and to submit to Spanish rule. Refusal was used to justify wars and enslavement. Many indigenous communities were forced to convert to Catholicism to avoid violence, torture, and persecution. Spanish missionaries destroyed indigenous temples, burned sacred texts, and killed native priests and shamans, believing them to be inspired by the devil. Hey gang, Mad Mark here to let you know that I now have new t-shirts available for my show, Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth. You can find these cool new shirts by searching Who Are the Aliens shirts on Amazon or by clicking the link on my website at madmarktv.com. They are available in a variety of sizes and colors with delivery through Amazon, a name you know and trust. That's the all-new Who Are the Aliens t-shirts, just like the one you see me wearing right here. Get yours now. They believed, of course, that if you could get the kings or high priests of these indigenous people to convert, then the masses would fall in line. So many times, this would involve bringing the king or priest into the center of the city in front of all the citizens and asking them if they would comply. When they refused, they were beheaded, right there in front of everyone. The people would then be more than happy to convert to Christianity after witnessing that, for fear of facing the same fate. But Rome got in there quick. It set up its hierarchy. It put Jesus on this unattainable pedestal of divinity that we could never attain. They took Jewish hope for liberation and turned it into a never-ending wait for salvation. This ultimately only served the empire, not our actual spiritual awakening. Any group that threatened their power and control were labeled as heretics and persecuted. They told us anything outside of the Bible was considered demonic in order to control where we went for the truth. Why do you think the Christian church hated the pagans or Wiccans so much? So much so that they demonized them as witches who were in league with the devil. Both Islam and Christianity have waged war against the pagans. One of the tricks used by Christianity was to utilize both the pagan god Pan and the satyrs as models for the image of Satan that they created. So now their imaginary bad guy looked just like a pagan god, and thus the Christians could use that fact as proof that the pagans were evil. See how they twisted everything? Of course, the reason that Christians and Muslims hated the pagans so much was because these people were holding on to the old ways and the true belief in multiple gods. And this was a direct threat to the Christian and Muslim belief in the one true God, Marduk, as we have proven on this program. Another thing that the Christians did was to plop their holidays of Christmas and Easter right down on top of the pagan holidays of Yule and Ostara. Many of the pagan traditions of these holidays, such as Christmas trees and Easter eggs, were later adopted by the Christian church. Oh, and where do you think the name Easter comes from? That's correct, from the pagan goddess Esther. So if your Christian holiday traditions include the family gathering around the Christmas tree to open gifts or hunting Easter eggs, congratulations, you're celebrating paganism. As Christianity spread, its leaders often used violence and destruction to eliminate the rival pagan faiths. But the Christians saw all of this as a necessary step to not only spread their one true God faith of Marduk, but to consolidate religious and political power. And there were severe punishments for anyone thought to be worshiping pagan gods. This included the torture and death of those accused of witchcraft. Ever heard of the Salem witch trials? The Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of the Witches, was a Christian document that served as a manual for witch hunts, demonstrating just how far they were willing to go with this. And the Muslims did basically the same things in their conquest of Mecca and elsewhere. Anything that went against Marduk's one true God belief was seen as sinful and condemned, similar to a dictator eliminating his competition. Funny how that works, isn't it? Different name, but same God, same strategy, same result. Marduk didn't just want the other Anunnaki gods squashed, he wanted them erased. But for now, let's return to when Rome hijacked Christianity. They wove all their Roman pagan themes into the mythology of Jesus in order to make it more palatable to the Gentiles. They distorted Jesus' message early on to the point where we don't know what those early Christians truly believed. They were persecuted. They were killed. Their texts were destroyed. Anything that went against the new uprising transition from the Roman Empire to the Roman Catholic Church was destroyed. We may never know the full scope of Jesus' teachings and what his mission here was really about. We have been blindly taught to continue trusting the doctrine and philosophy of a system that was never designed to preserve and protect Jesus' movement. It was designed to control and manipulate it into something that would serve them in the end. The man who flipped tables in the temple, the mystic who healed the sick without license, the soul who said, "You will do greater things than I," the Roman Empire turned him into a mascot. You know how corporations slap a smiling face on toxic products? That's what religion did with Yeshua. Rome took one of the most famous rebels in history and made him a brand. They edited his message, buried his teachings, and sold you a watered-down version of awakening, one that required them as the middleman. This wasn't spiritual preservation. It was a spiritual monopoly. The Christ was never meant to be worshipped like some distant god. He was a mirror showing you what you are. But a people who believe they are divine can't be ruled, can't be taxed into obedience, can't be guilted and abused or forced into wars. So the strategy was simple. Use his name to build a system that he never asked for. Make people think obedience equals holiness. Make questioning look like heresy and replace inner truth with outer dogma. The real Christ broke every rule of the system. He taught direct connection to source. He sat with outcasts. He disobeyed the law when it clashed with love. And yet, we're taught to worship him by doing the opposite. What if church was never the point? What if Christ was trying to break you out of religion, not drag you deeper into it? What if you're not supposed to ask, "What would Jesus do?" but instead ask, "What am I being called to embody?" Because Christ consciousness isn't a fandom. It's not a statue. It's not some doctrine. It's a frequency, a fire, a force, and no system could ever hope to contain it. When Rome started to collapse, they found a new weapon, and it wasn't an army. It was the Bible. Here's a photo of the Roman Empire at its peak in the year 117. It was massive. It contained most of the Middle East, all of Europe, and a lot of North Africa. That's a lot of land to govern over, especially when most of these countries they conquered absolutely hated them. But by the late 200s and early 300s, Rome was falling apart. Civil wars tore the empire from within. Invasions from the Goths and the Persians pushed at its borders. Corruption and economic collapse hollowed it out. The old gods weren't uniting people anymore. Rome was powerful on the battlefield, but weak at its core. So, in 312 CE, Constantine made a bold move. He converted to Christianity, but not the wild, diverse Christianity that actually existed from dozens of gospels, rival leaders, and competing visions. Rome needed one story it could control. They didn't just embrace faith, they reshaped it. By choosing which writings stayed and which were banned, Rome turned the Bible into a tool for the empire. Rome collapsed on the battlefield, but it survived through the church. The empire never died, it simply rebranded. There were dozens of gospels and writings in circulation. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Acts of Peter, just to name a few. By the early 300s, rival bishops were already fighting for authority, and Rome saw an opportunity. So Constantine called the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. the first of several councils where church leaders debated which books were orthodox and which were heresy. The Bible didn't just fall from heaven. It was curated, debated, and edited by men with political power. Some writings were declared holy, others were banned, burned, or buried. So when people say the Bible is eternal and unchanging, remember this: it was Rome's rebrand, and the empire lives on. So now let's turn the page and take a look at Islam. It's pretty much the same story, using the same formulas as Christianity. And why not? They are sister religions, built on the same lie known as the Old Testament, and both controlled by Marduk-Ra. The history of Islam originated with Muhammad's missions in Mecca and Medina at the start of the 7th century. So Islam is truly the new kid on the block as far as religions are concerned. According to traditional accounts, the Islamic prophet began receiving what Muslims consider to be divine revelations in the year 610, calling for submission to the one true God, aka Marduk Amun-Ra. As Muhammad's message began to attract more followers, he also met with increasing hostility and persecution from the Meccan elites. Then, in 622, Muhammad migrated to the city of Yathrib, now known as Medina, where he began to unify the tribes of Arabia under the banner of Islam. He then returned to Mecca and took control in the year 630 and immediately ordered the destruction of all pagan gods. Because, as I have said before, Marduk wanted any proof of or followers of any of the other Anunnaki gods erased. And how do we know that Allah is in fact Marduk, other than the obvious reasons that we have already mentioned? Well, let's look at that term, Allah. It originated as a contraction of the Arabic phrase al-Ilah. And what did that term mean? The God, the one true God, Marduk. And unfortunately, we are out of time for this episode. At the beginning of episode 23, I will continue with my examination of the Quran in the same way that I've examined Christianity and Yeshua. Let's see if there are any more similarities between the two. And then I will start in on the next subject that I wish to cover outside of Mr. Sitchin's books, my theory on racism. This is a topic that I have been researching for a while now. I have always hated racism, and so I dug deep and I asked the hard questions. I wanted to know why it exists and who is responsible for it, and I believe I have found the answer. This episode is going to ruffle some feathers. Be prepared to have your world turned upside down. No, you are not going to want to miss the next episode. And that is where I leave you for this episode. You have quite a lot to digest there, and we have so much more to cover and learn. I am Mad Mark, and I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed this episode. Please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. And please tell your friends and help spread the word about this show. If you have any questions regarding the content discussed on this program, just message me through madmarktv.com or on any of my social media platforms. Who are the aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth is written and produced by me, Mad Mark. Today we have taken another step in our ongoing journey to discover the truth. I promise you that things will get more and more interesting the further we delve into this topic of who are the aliens, the history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. Bye for now. You've been listening to Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth with your host, Mad Mark. Join us again on our next program when Mad Mark will once again uncover the answers to the mysteries that puzzle mankind.